install BLTouch is, of course, is to prepare the BLTouch itself. What do you need? Of course, BLTouch, which is, this one is the original one. Then you will need some support. You have two options. You can print them out. I printed them out in PLA. You will need a spacer, which is this one, that is going to be put over on top of the BLTouch to create some kind of distance. And then a holder that will be installed on the printer itself to hold the BLTouch in place. You can print them, as I told you, and I will link the STL in the description of the video. My choice has been to craft myself a steel version of this holder, because I'm planning to print in very high temperature material, and I don't want to risk for this one to bend. But if you're printing in PLA, this should be enough for you to get started. Of course, you need the usual nuts and bolts, and these springs are provided with the BLTouch. You will need this one. I'll give you also in the description a set of material that you may need, but it's very simple conceptually. So let's get started and let's install the BLTouch itself. So first of all, I'll place the spacer, which is needed for the Mingda Rock 3 at least Pro. Then we will need to put the bolt. So this is how it looks like. Let me show you. Okay. Then we put in the springs. To adjust, why are the springs used? To adjust dynamically the height of the BLTouch, and I will show you later why this is extremely important as a step. Then we will have to put, so it's going to be installed this way. So it's going to be installed with the connector facing the front of the printer, facing you basically. So, oops, let's start again. That's a kind of hard process because you have to keep everything in place. And let me just do it again. And while showing is always hard. So let's do it again. We put back in everything. Okay. While keeping that in place, we get the installation support. Oh, we have to have the screw past this thing. So as soon as we have that, of course there's springs, so they tend to jump around. The spacer is significantly big. So let's fix the first one with the nuts over here. This will help us to keep the second one in place while we finish. So down here, let's put the second one in place. Okay, very good. So let's screw a little bit more, and we will of course, as I told you, adjust this later down the line. This is how it looks like in the end. Let me show it closer to the camera. This installation, the part is finished. As you can see, this, let me just put it clearly. This will allow us to set dynamically the height of the BLTouch in case we will need that. Okay, so first part is done. Let's move to the next part, which is going to be to install this device into the printer itself. To install BLTouch, we will have to remove this protective cover from the hot end block. So first step, unscrew this plastic holder. It's just a commodity thing, so we can reach easier the screw that we have to unscrew to let it run free. So there are two screws on the top, 1 and 2. So just unscrew them. At this point, this protective block is going to be movable, so you can take it out. I strongly suggest you, first of all, to also remove this cage from the cable management. So there's a, probably it's hard to see for you, but there's a plastic plastic nut over here. So just untight it a little bit. So let's see if we can untight it. Okay, so now that we unscrewed this nut, this grid comes off. Let's put it aside. Now all the cable management, which undoubtedly is not ideal. Is already out of, let's say, open. Also, push this cable down a little bit in this plastic trunk, because we want to have more cable coming down, because the BLTouch connection is going to be pretty long. If you notice, Mingda already has a BLTouch cable unplugged but already wired for you, which makes things super easy. So this part is done. We will have to move this cable on the other side to install BLTouch, but let's move to the second step of the BLTouch installation on the mount bracket. The BLTouch is going to be installed on the back of the heat block. So of course there's no space now. So the first thing we have to do is to turn the cooling fan this way, so it faces us. This way we have freed up some space to let the BLTouch pass through. Mingda also has prepared for you two holes over down there that are used so you can plug these two holes over there with a screw. So it's already set up for you. So the first thing we have to do is, my suggestion is to plug in the BLTouch connection cable. So this cable that you saw on this side has to be plugged in the BLTouch. Just as a reminder, the visible contacts have to be externally on the BLTouch this way. So this is the correct way of installation. So first of all, let's move this cable down from the back into position. So help yourself with this cable. It is now free to move. Let the BLTouch cable pass by. Don't put too much stress on the BLTouch cable because it's a JST tiny connection, so it can fall off easy. So this is the way to do it. Help yourself with the cable letting in, and so you have enough space to work on the JST connector. After that, you just plug it in the BLTouch. With my big hands, this is not an easy step. So let's do it. Okay, this is now in place. Make sure it doesn't click, but you feel like it's solidly inserted. Now that we have the cable connected in the right position, there should no visible contacts externally. Just make sure that it's really pushed down. Don't be too strong or you're gonna break it. But just make sure it's not moving around, wobbling and stuff like that. Okay, now that we have the connection in place, we can proceed and install the BLTouch on this side through those mounting holes. So let me get what I need to do that. I'll need my screws. I will give you the list of things you need for this. Anyway, you'll need this kind of screw. So now I'll have to move myself around so I can do it. I will put the bolt here first, then try to get the hole over there. Okay, we're closed, done. Okay, to me this is locked in place. Just check all these cables to not be in the way of the BLTouch. Perfect. I think we have a good setup over here. Next step is going to be to install back the protective cover on the printer. First step is to put this cage back into the cable. So like we did before, we just put the cage in the first section of the cable, and with the plastic nut we just screw it up. One thing to be extremely careful, it's going to be hard to see, but it's an hexagon, the nut. You have to make sure that this face of the nut is completely flat, because this is important to be able to fit it back. Sorry, this part. Let me just do it myself. So this part, the one facing you, this nut has to be flat, otherwise it will hit the border over here. You won't be able to screw it back. So make sure that this section of the plastic nut is this way, completely flat. So now, again, the cable management could have been done like greatly better than this. But anyway, let's try to put it back. Just make sure all the cables are back into place and that there's nothing against the airflow on the fan. Okay, I got it in place. Now let's take us back the screw and let's try to fix it. So let's start from the back one, which is normally the complex one. Okay. Perfect. This is in place. Don't over tighten them, as always. The only last step left is to put back this cable holder nut in place. Here we go. BLTouch installed, all done. Next step, we will have to update the firmware to install the Mingda BLTouch enable firmware. Now I will show you at the computer how I do that. The new firmware with BLTouch support from the Mingda website. The website is 3dmingda.com. I'll give you the link in the description. So from this website, you go to the download section and firmware. From here, make sure you download Rock 3 Pro firmware for Add BLTouch. Questionable English, but that's the one you want. So download this one. Once it's downloaded, just decompress the file and we'll move on to the next step. After you decompressed the archive, you will have one file named firmware.bin. That is the firmware update. So click on the SD. Of course, you have to insert the SD card that comes with the printer in your computer. I'm on a Mac, but Windows is also gonna work almost the same. So make sure you delete all the files that are on the SD card. So the SD card has to be completely empty. So let me drop them. After we drop them, we copy the firmware.bin file inside the SD card. And then we eject the SD so we can put it inside the printer, and I'll show you what happens afterward. Before we do anything, there's one important thing to remember. The BLTouch pin, once retracted, should be higher than your nozzle. So the nozzle, this one, should be below the pin of the BLTouch. Otherwise, you will crash the BLTouch into the bed and it's going to be broken forever. And you have to replace the pin and all this stuff. So check to make sure that the height of your nozzle is lower than the BLTouch one. So in my case, it's not very technical way of doing that. You would probably want to have something that is touching the build plate completely flat to make sure that it's completely, that this thing is correct. If not, you can go ahead like I'm doing now and just screw more bolt. So you can, with the springs that we installed on the BLTouch, higher the BLTouch compared to the nozzle. I'm gonna do that right now. So let me take what I need for that. So now I'm gonna screw back. So let me just do that. I'm gonna screw back this so I can move it a little bit higher. Okay, it seems pretty good to me. We will make a check before we actually do it. Okay, this is done. This is a very important step. Just remind to do that and to do that and check it to make sure you don't break the BLTouch. Now that your SD card contains the firmware file, let's just plug the SD card into the printer with the printer off, and then we can now turn on the printer. As you will see in the screen, there's a upside down, of course, because there's a glitch, the progress of the firmware update. So the firmware is updating. Once the firmware is completely updated, then you will see BLTouch activating on the back and the classical screen. So now that we have installed the BLTouch firmware, everything is ready. We can check it by going to the menu and going, now you will have a new entry. It's going to be leveling. From the leveling, you can do all your stuff, including the ABL, which is going to be the first step to level the printer. So before doing any bed leveling, my suggestion is to set the nozzle temperature to be closer to your print temperature. So if you print, for example, PLA, I would set it to 180 maximum, and also set the bed temperature to the one that you normally use to print. So to me, for PLA, for example, is 60. So let's set my nozzle temperature to 180 and my bed temperature to 60, and let's wait to the temperature to be there. My suggestion, before we do anything else, my suggestion is going to be for you to keep an hand on the power button, because if something goes wrong with the BLTouch, just make sure you can turn off the printer right away before the nozzle slams into the bed or the probe itself slams into the bed. So it's on the other side, but just keep a good eye or be ready to turn off the printer. So first thing that we have to do is to run the ABL, so the auto bed leveling system with the BLTouch. After the firmware has been updated, again, you will have a new menu called leveling. If you go to leveling, you can push the ABL icon to start the ABL process. So let's start the ABL process and see where we go from there. So push on ABL. Now the printer will home. Now the ABL probe is completed. There's only one step left to do, which is the configuration of the offset or Z offset. So why do we have to calibrate the Z offset? Now we have to tell the printer basically the distance between the nozzle and the probe, so it can compensate and move the nozzle accordingly, because as we said, the probe pin and the nozzle height are different. This is called the Z offset. How do you calibrate the Z offset? It's a tedious process because this firmware doesn't make it easy, but anyway, how I do it, you go to the offset menu, and you can here set how many millimeter you want the offset to be, and also decimals, so it has to be pretty precise. The first thing I'll do, anyway, that's my process, I go and home the printer, so home. This way we get the printer in a known initial condition. There are multiple ways to do it. I think the official way from Mingda is to use baby stepping while printing. I prefer a more, structured approach to that, which is long, it takes longer, but to me, it delivers best results overall. So once the printer is homed, and again we are at 180 degree nozzle temperature and 60 bed temperature, I go back to the home, and then from the menu I want to move the Z offset, and now the printer by default stays 10 millimeter height. Selecting 1 millimeter, so just make sure 1 millimeter is selected, go down on the Z axis, so Z minus, and you see the printer moving. 8 millimeter, now 9, 8, 7, 6. You see it's approaching the bed. We don't want to smash it just in case. So you can use your classical piece of paper just to go down there and make sure we don't smash it. So down, 4 millimeter, 3 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 0. This is the current printer 0. As you can see, we are extremely far from the bed, and that is the effect of the Z offset. We have to tell the nozzle that he has to go lower than that. So how do we do that? We should set the offset to be negative. So we want to tell it, hey, nozzle, you have to go below 0 to reach the bed. So now that we know that we are way high, how do I do it? I go back, I go to leveling, offset, I set it to, like, let's say 1 millimeter, minus 1 millimeter, and probably it's not going to be enough, but anyway, let's set it to minus 1 millimeter, save the new setting a couple of times, back, and home again. So this way, we are telling the printer that the offset is minus 1 millimeter to the expected printer 0 level. So when we push down, we'll go 1 millimeter lower than before. Now it's time to be careful, because if we go too low, we are going to crash the nozzle into the bed. And I'll show you how I do it to make sure I never crash into the bed. Almost never. So, back, go to move, make sure that 1 millimeter is selected. As you can see now, the Z height is 11 millimeter, okay? Because the printer now thinks to be 1 millimeter higher, so it can go 1 millimeter lower. So again, having 1 millimeter, we go down, and we know the safe spot is 10 millimeter. We can go down 10 millimeters safely to get back to where we were before. So let's go down up to where the Z now is going to be 1 millimeter. Down, 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 down. Okay, now Z is 1 millimeter, where we were before. Having set the Z offset to minus 1 millimeter, we can go now down again 1 millimeter. Now, just to be safe, just don't smash it. Instead of selecting 1 millimeter, go a tenth of a millimeter. So we move way slower than before. So with a tenth of a millimeter selected as a movement, we just push down and we go 0.9, 0.8, 0.7, 0.6, 0.5, 0.4, and still we have space, 0.3, 0.2, 1, 0. And we still have space over here, okay? So, beautiful, I'll go back to leveling, offset. Now, and this is where, again, you have to be extremely careful. I'll push it 2 millimeters down. Probably it's gonna be too much. And I'll show you how I prevent crashing the tank. So save again, back, home. Let's move it down. Now I want to be sure I do it. So minus 4 millimeter. Save, back, home. Again, move 1 millimeter, and we go down to 1 millimeter. 9, 5, 1 millimeter, tenth of a millimeter, 0.9, 0.8, 0.7, 0.6, and we start to get some grip on the bed. So let's see, 0.6. Okay, 0.6 to me, it starts to get decent. Let's go down again, 0.5. Okay, 0.5 is my bed height. I think this is the correct thing. So 0.5, what happened now? So we know that 0.5 is, we cannot go farther down than 0.5 because we already reached our optimum. So let's go back here. Oh, okay, perfect. But the offset now is set to be able to go down even more than that. So 0.5 is what's the leftover. So I go back to leveling, offset. Now I back off, instead of minus 4, I set it to minus 3.5. This way I compensate for what is left over. So we figured out that my perfect offset is minus 3.5. Save, back, back, back. This is how you configure your Z offset and with BLTouch. So I run now a test print to see how it goes. Okay, the text print for the bed is done. As you can see, the BLTouch allowed to have a substantially consistent print over the first layer, but also I want to point out that, for example, in this spot and this spot, the ABL technology is not ideal at detecting bumps in the bed. It's perfect to understand how the bed is shaped and to compensate for that, but it will not fix bumps like this one. I think that's it for BLTouch. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you at the next video. Thanks.